Hey everyone, Danny California here, and oh my god, has it been 4 months since I've made a video? I was probably doing something really important. Yep, here it is, right here, I see. I was taking naps. So many naps. No, but really, I didn't want to make any new videos until the new rule set had come out, and then once it did come out, I wanted to make sure that I had time to really go over it and fully understand all the rules. And it's not that this new rule set is that much different than the old one, or that it's that much more difficult to understand. Although I think we can all agree there are some language choices that I would have done differently. Phrasing. But man, I really knew that old rule set. I mean, I knew it like the back of my hand. Like how I know on this hand I have 2 freckles, and on this hand I have a kitty cat. Meow. So to ease into this new rule set, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite penalties, cutting the track. And by favorite, I mean it's my mortal enemy. Okay, how can I explain this? If I were an unkillable axe-wielding serial murderer, cutting the track would be teenagers smoking pot and fornicating in the woods. Too much? Despite my ill will, you may be wondering what this penalty is all about. When a skater is out of bounds, they must re-enter the track without bettering their position in relation to other skaters. So if that skater re-enters bettering their position in front of 1 or more opposing skaters, or 2 or more teammates, they're cutting the track. Which leads to the question, when is a skater considered out of bounds? Well, it has to do with their skates. If any part of a skater's skates is touching the ground outside of the boundary line, they're considered out of bounds. Let's say that this is the track boundary, and this is in bounds, and this is out of bounds. If a skater's skate is fully inbounds, they're an inbound skater. If it's fully out of bounds, they're an out of bounds skater. If it's inbounds and touching the line, they're considered an inbound skater. However, as soon as any part of it crosses over and is touching the ground out of bounds, they're considered an out of bounds skater. Now the skate has to be touching the ground. For instance, if you're stopped on a toe stop, and your wheels are still on that line or in bounds, but your skate is hanging over out of bounds, you're still considered an inbound skater. But once those 2 wheels drop down, and you're touching the out of bounds portion, you're considered an out of bounds skater. So once you skate out of bounds, whether it's fully out of bounds or partially out of bounds, you have to think about how to re-enter the track legally without cutting any players. I would say that the majority of cutting the track penalties have to do with re-entering in front of the initiating blocker that knocked you out of bounds in the first place. Now keep in mind, even if the initiating blocker is behind you at the time that you go out of bounds, like let's say they hit you and it propels you forward and then out, they're still considered to have a superior position, so you have to re-enter behind them regardless. There are 4 exceptions that allow you to re-enter the track in front of the initiating blocker without penalty. The first is if the initiating blocker gets a penalty before you've re-entered the track. At that point, they're considered in the box, regardless of whether or not they've left the track. The second is if the initiating blocker goes out of bounds at any point after the initiating block. So if you're getting hit out of bounds, look at the player's feet. If you notice that they also go out of bounds, go ahead and re-enter in front of them. I know that a lot of skaters don't pay attention to this, and they end up wasting time and energy trying to re-enter behind a player that they didn't have to. The third is when the initiating blocker falls or takes a knee after initiating the block. At this point, they've taken themselves out of play, so you have a free pass to re-enter in front of them. And the fourth exception is when the initiating blocker skates outside of the engagement zone after initiating the block. Now most people only worry about re-entering behind the initiating blocker when it comes to cutting the track, but you really have to pay attention to where everybody else is on the track as well. Now let's say this blocker hits this jammer out of bounds. So now this jammer is probably only concerned about re-entering behind the initiating blocker. But let's say this blocker also runs back. If the jammer only worries about this blocker and re-enters behind her, she might not realize that now she's re-entered in front of a player that was in front of her at the time that she went out of bounds. So at this point, this skater has cut the track on this skater. And don't think you only have to worry about the opposing team either. You also have to worry about your own teammates. If you re-enter the track in front of one of your own teammates, bettering your position, it's not a penalty. But if you re-enter and better your position in front of 2 or more of your teammates, that is a cutting the track penalty. I guess the reason why I hate cut track penalties so much is that they are somewhat avoidable. So if you know the rules and you skate smart, you can cut down on your cut track penalties and save yourself some unnecessary trips to the penalty box. But you didn't have to cut that track. Skate out of bounds and come back in front of